بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها فإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار وبعد. My brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah today we'll continue where we left off last week. So we had started talking about the definition of aqd and the definition of tasarruf. Inshallah, we'll just very quickly look at the categories of tasarruf, and then we'll go on ahead to the categories of transactions, inshallah. So the categories of transactions are quite a few. So we'll have a look at those as soon as we've done with the categories of tasarruf. So the categories of tasarruf can be divided, number one, into two main categories. And then under the second category, there are other categories as well, subcategories, inshallah. So the two main categories are those which are actions and non-verbal, like the acquisition of assets. Like the acquisition of assets. So acquisition of assets, you don't have to, say anything. There's nothing required in terms of, saying or any statements. So this is non-verbal and actions which are done with the other part of, with the limbs of the other, with the other limbs of the body, other than the tongue. So you can probably guess what's the second category. Second is obviously the ones which are verbal, right? So I think that's pretty straightforward. So those that are verbal, again, the ones that are verbal are divided into two categories. So the first category, from amongst those which are verbal, the first one is those which are two-sided, like transactions and partnerships. Two-sided, like transactions and partnerships. All right, so you can probably guess the other one then. One-sided, right? So the other ones are one-sided. And again, the one-sided ones are categorized into two. All right, so till now, as you can see, they all fall under tasarruf, but what else do they fall under till now? What else do they fall under? They also fall under aqd, exactly right. So all of these things which we've covered so far, they all fall under aqd. So till now, they all fall under aqd. Okay, so one-sided, let's look at which ones are one-sided. So they include a decision to initiate a right or cancel it, like endowments and forfeiting one's rights. Like endowments and forfeiting one's rights. So one-sided, we said that, there's no ijab and qubul in one-sided. So two-sided, there is ijab and qubul involved. One-sided, there is no ijab and qubul involved because it is just from one person. So endowments are things like endowments means waqf in Arabic. All right, so making things a waqf or making something into a trust. All right, so for example, if someone donates something to the masjid, specifically for masjid use, all right, something was his own property, he gave it to the masjid. So there is no two-way agreement. The masjid doesn't necessarily have to consent, all right, and neither can the masjid consent, like the masjid as in we're talking about the building. It can't really consent to anything or anyone. So, the person just gives it as a waqf, as an endowment to the masjid. All right? So gives, say, for example, some books or build some maybe desks, make some desks for the masjid, or put some chairs or something along those lines for the masjid, or donates carpets for masjid use only and makes it a waqf, and so on and so forth. So it's only one-sided. All right. The other one is forfeiting one's rights. Forfeiting one's rights. So, for example, if someone was owed something, all right, someone was owed something, and he says, I don't want it. All right. So, for example, someone owes me money, and I say that no, I don't want the money anymore. You can keep it. So I'm letting it go. I'm forfeiting my rights to get that money from you. All right. So again, for this, there is no need for the acceptance of the person who is owing that person. There is no need for an acceptance. So it's not like an offer and acceptance. It's only one-sided. Right? So clear, inshallah, so far? Yeah, pretty straightforward. The next one is, again, under one-sided tasarruf, types of tasarruf. The second one is that does not include an intention to initiate or cancel a right, but they are statements of another kind, like oaths and confessions. Oaths and confessions. So, in endowments, you're initiating a right. Is that correct? In endowments, you're initiating a right. A right for whom? Masjid, right? You're initiating a right for the masjid. So this is now going to be the masjid's, right? So you are initiating the right, and it's only one-sided, right? And similarly, forfeiting one's right, you're doing it from your own side. You're taking away a right which was yours before, and you're basically forfeiting that right. Okay, so the next one is the ones which don't involve this. The ones which don't involve this. For example, confessions. Confession, you're not really initiating a right of any sort. All right, you're just confessing to something, right? You're confessing to something that I did this or I did that or whatever. So this is also under the general umbrella of tasarruf. However, this last one does not fall under the category of what? It does not fall under aqd. Neither the general aqd, neither the specific aqd, and neither the general aqd. So we said general is, can be one-sided as well, right? So general can be one-sided. But from the one-sided of tasarruf, the first one, which includes a decision to initiate a right, that falls under, does that fall under the general aqd or not? Huh? It falls under the general aqd, right? But this last one, it doesn't fall into any type of aqd. It doesn't fall into any category of aqd. So it is not a type of aqd. So you can say that this last category is the differentiating factor between tasarruf and the general aqd. And the differentiating factor between tasarruf and the specific aqd is obviously, the last two categories, which are both one-sided. So one-sided is not included in the specific type of aqd. Right, so I hope this is very clear, inshallah. Anyway, this is just for the time being, just try to grasp as much as possible. We will revisit this again, inshallah. We will revisit this again in the future.
Oath is not two-sided.
Sorry?
Oath is always a two-sided. Yes? One is giving the oath, the other one accepted.
No. Person giving the oath, he's the only one doing it. So if I wanted to give an oath, for example, if I wanted to take an oath, all right? So there is, sometimes it is a requirement to take an oath, all right? So there you can say maybe it's two-sided. But in general, oaths are not two-sided. In general, I'm saying, in general. So it can be just, I'm taking an oath just like that. So for example, I take an oath on whatever. I make an oath of whatever, right? So it does not have to be requested by someone, or it doesn't have to be obligated by someone upon me. It can just be by myself. I'm just taking an oath, right? So for example, if you say that, I think your car hit my car. I say, no, it didn't. The general oath is just one-sided. The general oath is just one-sided. So as an example, you say that I hit your car, and then I said that no, I didn't, and then, we're arguing about it. So I decided, you didn't request me anything, I just decided to take an oath. I just decided to touch the Quran and take an oath on Allah and say that, I take an oath on Allah that, I have not touched your car. My car has not touched your car, as an example, right? So you did not request it, I just did it by myself. All right, so that's one-sided. It's not two-sided necessarily. Sometimes it can be two-sided. Sometimes it can be two-sided, but generally it doesn't need to be two-sided. Does that make sense?
Excuse me, if that person is not accepting that, it means that he is not telling the truth.
Who?
The one who doesn't take the oath.
Yeah?
He claims that you're in his car. But you say, okay, let's take an oath. But he's not saying that, no, I'm not taking the oath. That you're truthful.
No. So I'm saying that I take the oath just by myself, just to make him believe me, for example, right? Like, for example, how many, it's not really an oath, it's more of type of qasam. How many people just say, wallah, wallah, for everything. So, wallahi, I did this, or I didn't do that, whatever. So, taking an oath by, touching the Quran or something along those lines, this can just be one-sided. What we're just trying to say is that it is, the general oath is just one-sided. It doesn't necessarily need to be two-sided. So, it doesn't need to be requested by anyone. Make sense? All right, inshallah. So for the purposes of this course, I'll just make it very, very clear, inshallah. When we do say aqd, from now on, as far as possible, unless required to make it specific and to say aqd, I will inshallah translate aqd as either a transaction or a contract, either of the two. All right? Either a transaction or a contract. So depending on the context. So in some contexts, it is better to translate it as a contract. In some contexts, it is better to translate it as a transaction. All right? So depending on what context it is, this is how I will translate it for the purposes of this course, inshallah. So I'll just make that clear. So I don't want to be, just saying aqd all the time, aqd, because obviously it's an Arabic word, and we want to move slightly towards English, inshallah. So categories of aqd. Now, aqd or transactions, they have many different categories from many different perspectives. So depending on which perspective you're looking at, it will have different categories. So we're going to be looking at a few of those perspectives now, inshallah. So straight away, inshallah, we'll be looking at two perspectives. The first one today. If we get to start on the second one, inshallah, we'll look at the second one as well. But at least we'll make a start on the first perspective, inshallah. So the first perspective is from the perspective of the goal and the objective. The goal and the objective. What does this mean? That means after doing that transaction, what is actually going to be achieved? What is actually going to be achieved? Does that make sense? So is it, for example, so there are some types of transactions which achieve taking care of something or looking after something. That's the objective of it. So for example, I give someone, my car to look after. For example, if I'm going on a holiday or something, I give someone my car to look after, to drive it, regularly, just to make sure the engine is running, etc., etc. So I give it to them for safekeeping. All right. So the objective is what? Safekeeping. It's not to give you ownership of the car. It's for safekeeping. Right. Then you have sale transactions which are for ownership. The ultimate objective is ownership. So I sell you something, and the objective or the purpose of that sale is that I'm giving it to you so that you can own it. You are the owner after this. So I'm transferring this from my ownership to your ownership. All right? So for some transactions, the objective is ownership. Some transactions, the objective is safekeeping. And other transactions, it's other things, inshallah. So this is exactly what we're going to look at. So it's from this perspective. So the perspective of the goal and the objective. All right. So the first category under this perspective, all right, is obviously, as you can you guess what it is? So I've put some pictures which indicate to what it actually could be. Ownership, transfer of ownership. So I give you the keys, it's yours now, All right, so it's transfer of ownership. So ownership transactions, there are two types of ownership transactions. Ownership transactions can either be in exchange for something, or it can be just like that as, as charity or something along those lines. All right? So inshallah, we're going to look at those two categories, inshallah. So firstly, ownership transactions, as you guessed correctly. So ownership transactions, the first type is uqudul muawadat. Uqudul muawadat, or transactions in lieu of compensation. So this is obviously like, sale transactions. Very straightforward and very simple. Sale transactions, or can someone give me another example? Simple example. It's not difficult. It's not a trick question. So, sorry?
It should be a transaction, but
It should be a transaction. It should be for ownership, for the purpose of ownership. So obviously all of these are transactions anyway. So it should be for the purpose of ownership, and it should be in exchange for something. Yep. Huh? All right, let's look at some examples, inshallah. Sorry? Yeah, so that's also, yeah. So trading in a second-hand car for a new one. So again, that's again a type of sale, a type of sale transaction. So again, a sale contract is included into ownership transactions, which are in exchange for some compensation or in lieu of compensation. Another example is lease. All right, lease. So how does lease work? Can someone just give me like a brief description of how lease works? No one knows what lease is? Huh? No, so lending is for ownership or not for ownership?
no, it's actually over time.
Yes, very good. Yep. So that's what this lease is talking about. So sometimes lease can be referred to as rent as well, right? But the actual lease refers to, payments over time in, installments, right? And ultimately, it is towards ownership. All right. So for example, sorry. Hire purchase, yeah. Hire purchase. All right, so for example, you buy a car, all right, and there are, quite a few of these transactions available in the market. You buy a car, and you pay installments over a period of few years, and they do the servicing for you, they take care of the car, etc., depending on which company you make this transaction with. But they do everything, and you pay those installments, and depending on how many years you paid over, the installments will be different or whatever. And, at the end, you will get ownership of that car. Afterwards, after 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, whatever time period it is, you get ownership of that car. All right? So this is called a lease. This is an example of a lease. Same thing can work with a house as well, where you are staying in a house and you take it on lease. So you pay, for example, $500 per week or $300 per week or whatever, over a period of however many years, and after these many years, it is in the contract that it will be yours, and after these many payments and these many years, the house will be yours. So it is, for hire purchase, if you want to call it that. So it's called a lease, right? So this is also an ownership transaction, because ultimately the objective is to own that property. The objective of that transaction is to own that property. But when you just hire or rent, the objective is not to own, it's just to use. All right, the objective is not to own, it is just to use. So therefore, it does not fall under this category. Make sense? The next one is charitable transactions, uqud al-tabarru'at, charitable transactions. So obviously, as you can imagine, charitable transactions, what does that mean? What do you think that means? Sorry? Transfer of ownership without compensation. Very good. All right. So obviously this includes gifts and donations, right? But if you want to explain what it means, what uqud al-tabarru'at means, it is transfer of ownership without any compensation. Without any compensation. I think that's very straightforward, inshallah. So an example obviously is gifts, all right? So hiba, it's called hiba in Arabic. So if you give something to someone as a gift, you're not expecting anything in return. So therefore it is from uqud al-tabarru'at. It is one of the uqud al-tabarru'at, one of the charitable transactions. The next one is gratuitous loans. Gratuitous loans. Does anyone know what this is? It's called ariyah in Arabic. It's called ariyah in Arabic, gratuitous loans. What is a gratuitous loan? Now, I know this is a fancy term. Huh? To borrow something and give it back. Very good. That's what it is. All right. I know it's a fancy term, so probably it might not click as to what it actually is. But obviously, since we're doing it properly, so inshallah, I thought that I would get the proper words for it, inshallah, and share with you the right words. So it's a gratuitous loan. So gratuitous loan is where you actually borrow something to someone. So you loan something to someone for them to use it. All right, for them to use it. And you don't expect anything in return. You don't expect anything in return. So these are uqud al-tabarru'at. Legacy? What's a legacy? So wiratha is something different. It's not a. Is it aqd? Why is it not aqd? So this is an application. Good. Normally I won't answer questions, so I answer it, but it's a good point. I just want to see how your application is. So wiratha or inheritance, right? So for example, someone passes away in our family, and you get some money from them. Is that aqd firstly? Is that aqd? Huh? Why isn't it aqd? It's not a combination of offer and acceptance. Very good. Simple. There's no offer and acceptance. All right? So it's not considered as aqd. Very good. Excellent. So it won't fall under this. So here we're discussing uqud only. All right? So that's why it won't fall under this. All right, so it's very clear so far. So the first one was transactions for the purpose of ownership. Transactions for the purpose of ownership. All right? So inshallah, hopefully that is straightforward. The next one, what's the next one? Can you guess? Security, yeah, it says very clear. All right, so the purpose is to secure something or to guarantee something. All right? It's called uqud al-tawthiqah. Uqud al-tawthiqah. Security or guarantee transactions. So, can someone off the top of their head, guess an example of this? Mortgage. What do you mean by mortgage?
You're taking a loan, your house is security for that.
Okay. Yep, okay. Yep, okay, so that's an example. Anyone else? Any other examples? All right, so we'll give a couple of examples. Qarda hasana, that's just giving a loan without expecting anything in return, right? So that's not really a for the purposes of security. So here security. No, we're not talking about from that perspective. We're talking about from the perspective to guarantee that you will get your right. So, for example, it's to secure your right, right? It's to secure your right. I'll give you an example very quickly. So, you borrow me your car, for example, right? So, for you to be sure that I will give your car back, you want to keep something of mine as security, right? Say, for example, a laptop or whatever else, something of value, you want to keep it as security so that you are sure that I will, inshallah, return it. All right? So that's what we mean by security or guarantee transactions. All right? So,
Like we pay bond at the start of the
yeah, something like a deposit. Yep. So that also is included in there. Yep. So this transaction, or rather this. Yeah, so this transaction of tawthiqah can be done, in a couple of ways. All right, it can either be done through an item. All right, it can be done through an item. So you borrow me something, and to make sure that you get it back, I give you an item, right, to keep of mine as security or as guarantee. All right, so it can be through an item. Now this in Arabic is called rahn. Rahn. All right. The second one is a person. Right? A person. Now, obviously you don't give a person to someone, abduct him and give him, okay, have this person, keep him on my behalf, or keep my child on my behalf, and make him do whatever. No, it does not mean that. What it means actually is, or an example of it rather, is kafala. All right, kafala. Now, kafala is where a person takes guarantee on behalf of someone. So, for example, say Brother Nurullah, he borrows me some money. All right, he borrows me some money. Now he's hesitant to give me some money. Why? Because maybe my credit rating is not that great. My reputation is not so great in terms of, returning the money and paying back my loans, etc. So he says he still feels sorry for me, so he still wants to borrow me the money. But now he says that, okay, give me a person as a guarantee. Give me a kafil, a guarantor. All right, it's called a guarantor. So for example, maybe Abdul Mannan says, okay, if Safdar doesn't pay you back, I will take care of it, inshallah. I will pay you back. I'll make sure that the money comes to you. So if he doesn't pay you back, I will pay you back. So he becomes a guarantor. This is called a kafil. All right, this is called a kafil. So in this way, there are two ways in which a person can give a guarantee. One is through an item, which is called rahan in Arabic, and the other one is through a person, so like a guarantor, and this is called a kafil in Arabic, or the concept is called kafala. The concept is called kafala. So obviously, all of these transactions are where the objective is to give assurance of the right to the owner of the right. All right. So this is in brief what this means. So security or guarantee transactions, uqud al-tawthiqah.
With the hand thing, the one which is exchanging some item, can you take some compensation like that? If I'm giving my car to someone and he's giving his laptop, I said like, but my car value is more than your laptop, so you have to give me some compensation or extra money, something like that. Can we do like that?
It's up to the person. It depends. So rahan, we're just talking about just the act of giving the rahan. That's called uqud al-tawthiqah. We're just talking about the act for the time being. As to how and when, if extra can be given or how much should be given, inshallah we'll be discussing those in the future when we actually come to it. All right, inshallah. So we'll be discussing that in detail. But just to understand, this is just to understand the concept, what the concept is. So whether just the laptop is enough or not, that we'll come to talk about it, inshallah. So two types, yeah? So clear, inshallah, so far? Yep. The next one is, can you guess? Huh? So yeah, very close, but just another, I have used another word. So in Arabic it is called uqud al-isqatat. Uqud al-isqatat, meaning relinquishing transactions, where you relinquish your rights, where you cancel or relinquish your rights, or forfeit your right, if you want to call it that, forfeit your right. All right, so these are uqud al-isqatat, or relinquishing transactions. So these are transactions where the objective is to relinquish one's right, whether it be in return for something or not. All right, who can give me some examples? I already gave an example, so if you just want to repeat that, that's fine. Huh?
Giving up your rights of inheritance.
Giving up your rights of inheritance. Okay, fair enough. Although inheritance itself is not an act, but yeah, I mean the act of giving it up, fair enough. Okay. Anything else? Yep. So acquittal of loans, for example, right? Someone owes you something, you say, I don't want it. Giving discount on something, yeah, even that is relinquishing your right. So yeah, okay. But in reality, that won't be considered a relinquishing per se. The reason is because it wasn't your right in the first place. So for example, I want to sell you this water, right? And you want to give me, say, so I expect $1 for this, as an example. So $1 is not really my right in the first place for me to relinquish. You understand what I'm trying to say? But once we've agreed that, okay, once we've agreed that, okay, you have to give me $1 for it, and then after that, I say, just keep it, it's okay. You can just have it for free. All right, so that will be relinquishing. But just to give you a discount, no, that's not relinquishing the right, because that wasn't my right in the first place. Make sense? Yeah, so that will also be relinquishing your right. Yep. So, just giving it up completely. So, for example, you have a partnership with someone, right? So you have 50% share, he has 50% share. So without him actually buying you out, right, buying your share out, you just say, I give up my share and I give it to you. That will be relinquishing your right. But if he buys you out, that's not really relinquishing your right, is it? Because you still got your right back, right? Relinquishing meaning forfeiting your right. You actually owed something, meaning something is due to you. All right, so discount, it doesn't mean that it's due to you. If someone buys you out in a partnership, it doesn't mean that is due to you and you didn't get it. You still got your rights. All right? It should be written, right? I mean, partnerships generally should be written, but even if it wasn't written, there's still an agreement, right? There's still an agreement. All right, so relinquishing transactions, isqatat. Some examples. So acquittal of a debt. We've gone through that one already. Another one, foregoing one's right of preemption. Anyone? Preemption, right of preemption. So right of preemption, we said was, it is called shuf'ah in Arabic. Shuf'ah in Arabic. So what is shuf'ah is basically, say there is a partner in a house, right? So two people own one house. Two people own one house. Now say, for example, me and my brother, say, own a house together, right? Now, I want to sell my share of the house. I want to sell my 50% of the house. Now, in Islam, there is something called haqqu shuf'ah. Now, haqqu shuf'ah is where the person who is the other partner, right, who is the other partner, he gets first right to actually buy my share. He gets first choice. He gets given that choice first, before anyone else. Right? He gets given that choice first before anyone else. So my brother has the chance to buy my share before other people have the chance to buy my share. So this is called the right of preemption. All right? And it applies to some other cases as well. It's not just in partnerships. It applies to some other cases as well. Inshallah, we'll talk about it when we come to it. However, say, for example, my brother has been given the choice and he says, I don't want that right, so I don't want to buy you out. All right? So he has forfeited his right of preemption. He has forfeited his right to buy me out. All right, to buy my share as well. All right, so this is called foregoing one's right of preemption. Shuf'ah, shuf'ah. Sheen, fa, ayn, and ta marbuta. The other example is relinquishing one's right of legal retribution for murder. Relinquishing one's right of legal retribution for murder. So obviously this happens in a country where, the Islamic, rules and laws will be applied by the government. All right. So in Islamic countries, basically. So in the Islamic legal system, we have a concept where it's a type of capital punishment, basically. But the family of the person who was murdered, they have the right to seek that retribution. All right, they have the right to seek that capital punishment. So if they want to forgive that, if they want to overlook it, they actually have that right. So they actually have the choice to let go of that right of seeking retribution from the murderer. Does that make sense? So in Islam, it's not the case that he has to be killed. No. It all depends on, the family of the murdered person. All right? So if they want to, forego their right, if they want to relinquish their right of legal retribution, then they have the right to do so. So this is also an example of a relinquishing transaction. So relinquishing one's right. Can anyone guess this one? So it's exactly the opposite of what is on the board, what it is indicating. So transactions of. So what is the opposite of that? Permitting. So what's another word for permitting? The one that is used there. Authorization. Very good. All right, so transactions of authorization. So what does this mean? This means that someone gives another person the right to act on their wealth on their behalf. To act on their wealth on their behalf. So something which is not someone else's right, the person who actually has that right gives them that right. So for example, I have my car and I want my car sold. So say I appoint, for example, Brother Abdul Samad to go and sell my car. All right? So this is an example of uqudul what? Itlaqat. Uqudul itlaqat. So giving someone the authorization to do something or act on my wealth. Examples? Sorry? Power of attorney, very good. Excellent. So granting someone the power of attorney. Everyone knows what that is, right? Yep. Another example, appointing an executor for a will. Appointing an executor for a will. So the next one. Can anyone guess this one? I think this will be a little bit harder to guess because the picture which I've used, it is indicative, but it's not directly indicative. Cancelling it is towards cancelling a transaction, but it is more restricting someone's right. Restricting someone's right. All right? So it's not completely cancelling, so that picture doesn't do this justice. But nevertheless, sometimes it's hard to find the right pics, Anyway, so it's called uqud al-taqyid. Uqud al-taqyid, meaning restrictive transactions. So restricting someone's right. Restricting someone's right for a legal reason, obviously, for a lawful reason. So who can give me an example? And you can give me an example related to the previous one. So the previous one was authorizing someone. Sorry? No, it doesn't. No, it does. It's not that kind of restriction. House arrest. So that's not really a transaction. It's restrictive, I know, but it's not a transaction though. So the one part was right, but the other part is not correct. So in the previous one, we said that you authorize someone to do something on your behalf, right? So executor of a will. So you appoint someone as an executor of a will, right? So how would you restrict that now? You take away that right, right? Not setting them a limit. It's like taking away the right, taking away that right. So for example, you tell someone you're the executor of the will, and then after a few days you thought that, this guy's, backstabbed me, he's taken my position or something along those lines, whatever. And then you say that, you're not going to be my executor of the will anymore. You're not going to be the executor of my will anymore.
It's not someone behaving on an orphan. When the orphan is in puberty age, and he takes his own, the right his own understanding.
Yeah, so that's not restricting someone's right.
The temporary person who was authorized is
Yeah, so okay, yeah, so that would be as well. So their right goes away. Their right of acting on their wealth goes away, acting on behalf of the orphan's wealth, that goes away or that is taken away. That is also a restrictive transaction. Very good. Yep, that is also included in that.
Cancelling of power of attorney.
Yep, that is also exactly right. So cancellation of the power of attorney, that is also included in that. All right, so restrictive transactions. So we'll talk about that when we come to that, inshallah. All right, so we're just going to give, so here we're not actually discussing these, right? We're not actually discussing them in detail. We're just mentioning them, all right? So I'm just mentioning these to sort of understand, so that we can understand what they are. So detailed discussion, inshallah, we'll come to it when we come to it. So rescind the power of attorney, all right? Take back our power of attorney. That's one example. Another example is rescind the authority of an executor of will. All right, so two very simple examples, inshallah. So I've tried to keep it simple here for the time being. The next one. This one is easy to guess, inshallah. What type of transactions are these? So it's not the germ part. All right, it's not the family part either. Sorry? Safeguarding transactions, very good. Transaction for safekeeping or safeguarding. Not exactly, no. So it's for actual safekeeping or safeguarding something. And we'll talk about what that is, inshallah. So it's عقود الحفظ. عقود الحفظ. So uqud or transactions for the purpose of actual taking care of something or safeguarding something, safekeeping something. So obviously this can be taking care of someone's property. So you give your property to someone for safekeeping, like an amana. All right, it's called a wadi'ah in Arabic. It's called an amana or a wadi'ah in Arabic. All right, so I give someone my car for safekeeping, to look after it while I'm gone, for example, or to look after my house, for example, until I'm gone. So this is, giving something to someone for safekeeping. Or it could be appointing someone for looking after something. Like, for example, appointing a guard, appointing a bodyguard, or appointing a guard to look after the house, right? Or appointing a security company, hiring a security company to look after the house. So, for example, you know how you have, caretaker, but you know how you have, like, for example, cameras installed, and then those cameras are actually monitored by a security company, right? So that transaction is also, it's called a safeguarding transaction. All right, so the money that you pay in that transaction is a safeguarding transaction. So you're actually paying them money to look after your property. All right, so that's an example of it. Sorry? Yeah? Jizya? I mean, zakat is actually not considered like a full transaction per se. And even jizya, I mean, I wouldn't consider it a full-fledged transaction per se. Because that is something which is made compulsory on the person, right? So there are some, there are not transactions, there are some types of, exchange of wealth, if you want to call it that, exchange of wealth, which is not considered as a transaction from a Islamic perspective. Why? Because there is no consent from both sides involved. Some things you just have to pay, like for example zakat. Whether you want to, I mean, hopefully everyone pays it, because they want to please Allah, but ultimately it is something which you have to pay, right? Similarly with taxes. So jizya is like a tax, right? So tax is something which everyone has to pay. It's not something which we're paying with our own consent. So it's not like we have agreed to pay it or we have consented, both sides have consented to pay it. It's more one-sided. The other side has not really consented to it. All right? So that won't really be considered as a transaction under this rule. All right? So transactions are those which we said from both sides you have a consent. So ijab and a qabul. So there is a consent from both sides. So safeguarding transactions, examples, number one, safeguarding a trust. So amana, looking after an amana. Another one, standing guard over a property. Very simple and straightforward. All right, the next one. Can you guess? Partnerships, very good. All right, partnerships. So partnership transactions or uqudul ishtirak. Uqudul ishtirak. Now under this, there are quite a few types of transactions. Quite a few types of transactions. So you know what a partnership is, right? We'll discuss, the full meaning and the full definition in detail when we come to it, inshallah. But just for the purposes of understanding what it is here, a partnership is where, two people decide to do something, right? Two people decide to do business together, for example. All right? And it could be other types so there are different types of partnerships. So we'll discuss some, we'll just look at some of the types of, partnerships, inshallah. But before we do that, just have a quick look at the description of what a partnership is. So these are transactions where the objective is to share in the capital, work, and profits. All right? Share in the capital, work, and or profits. All right? So some examples. So shirkatul amwal. Shirkatul amwal. So shirkatul amwal is basically a very simple business partnership. A very simple business partnership. You can have a look at the definition on the screen, inshallah. I'll just read out the definition quickly. A partnership between two or more parties for the purpose of earning profit by means of investment in a joint business venture. All right, straightforward? Yep. I don't think anyone should have difficulty understanding that one. The next one is shirkatul a'mal. A quick look at the definition, inshallah. A partnership between two or more parties where each of them agrees to a certain type of work within the venture, and they agree to a specified percentage of the income as remuneration for the work done. So for example, two people get together. So they're not just investing, they're not just putting in the money. So the first one was you just put in the money. Two people just put in the money and, whoever, does the actual work. All right, so two people just putting in the money. Two purely investors. Here, two people are investors, but at the same time, they do some work as well. So for example, if someone has a contracting business, right, so one person is, say, a plumber, another partner is, say, an electrician, a third partner might be a bricklayer or a tiler or whatever. All right, so they decide to form a company where they will provide contracting services to people, and for example, they were called to renovate a kitchen, as an example. They're called to renovate a kitchen, so their work is specified. The plumber will do the plumbing work, the tiler will do the tiling work, and if there's a cabinet maker, he'll do the cabinetry, and so on and so forth. So they will have their jobs specified, and their returns will also be specified as well, according to that. All right, so this is called shirkatul a'mal. By the way, we're only going to be looking at just 4 as examples. We're not going to be discussing them in detail. But there are more, all right? So just to let you know that there are actually more than just these types. But these are the more common ones, inshallah. So shirkatul wujuh. All right, shirkatul wujuh. So a partnership of creditworthiness, goodwill, where the subject matter is bought on credit from the market on the basis of a relationship of goodwill with the supplier with the aim of reselling at a profit to be shared. Did anyone understand what that meant? Anyone understand what that meant? Yes or no? No? Okay. So for example, Brother Widodo, he's a supplier of, say for example, he's in the seafood business, he's the supplier of prawns. All right? He's a prawn supplier. Now, I have a restaurant, for example. All right? I have a restaurant, for example. Now, I need prawns, but I don't have a lot of capital. So I need to take it on loan, for example. I need to take whatever supplies from Brother Widodo on credit, right? So I take it on credit, but he says that, I'll give it to you, but, I want a share of your restaurant business as well. So whatever you earn from the restaurant, I want a little bit of share. So I will give it to you for free. All right, I will just give it to you, but I want a share of, the shares, the returns, the profits. So this is what is known as shirkatul wujuh. Now obviously this has to be specified, so there are rules to it, which we will discuss inshallah, but this is basically what it is. The next one, the last one, is mudarabah. Now this, for some of you that have actually looked into Islamic financing, or in Islamic banking, you would have probably heard the word mudarabah. Has anyone heard the word mudarabah? Alright, so what does mudarabah mean? Just very quickly.
Your partner both for loss and profit.
Sorry?
You are the business part for both profit and loss.
No.
Or
Anyone?
The other one is financial and the other one is working.
Very good, excellent. So it's as simple as that. Alright? So mudarabah, one is the investor, the financier, and the other one is the worker. But they share the profits. They share the profits according to a specified amount. So for example, someone has money, alright, but he can't do the work. He maybe has the ideas, but he can't do the work. Alright? So he comes up. Alright, he comes up. And he says, I'll give you, $50,000, and I want you to start a clothing business. I have these ideas. I want this done. So you do it. I will give the money. You don't have to put in any money. You do the work, and we will share the profits. All right. This is called mudarabah. It's as simple as that. Now, the reason why some of you would have heard mudarabah, and this term mudarabah in Islamic finance, is because many Islamic banks use this concept. All right? So who's the financier? The Islamic bank. No. The financier, the person who's giving the finance, person who's providing the funds, the investor. So the investor is the Islamic bank or the Islamic financial institution, right? And who's the worker? The person taking the loan. Very good. The worker is the person taking the loan. It's always not as simple as that. The way the Islamic banking system works, it's not as simple as that. We'll look at that ahead, inshallah. But this is one of the terms they use, and I just wanted to explain what this term means, inshallah. So it's as simple as one is the financier, the other one is the worker, and they share the profits. Make sense?
is the loss is a silent partner.
Silent partner, yeah. It's a silent partner. Yeah.
If they lost the money,
If they lost the money,
like always you can't expect the profit. If they lost the money, then
yeah. All right, so as I said, we'll come to the questions, the detailed questions later on, inshallah, when we actually discuss the topic. Now, just wanted to understand what the concept is, just the basic concept, inshallah. All right?
this mudarabah, only they are sharing the profit, not the loss.
No, they're supposed to share everything.
Somebody is giving the money, then they do himself. The other part is doing that, and they are sharing the profits.
Yep.
But if the profits didn't happen, then loss happened. Again, they are sharing all the
Both share the loss. One shares a financial loss, the other shares a loss in their work. So they work, but they haven't.
loss.
Sorry?
They are sharing both profit.
Yes, sharing profit and loss. Yeah. Sorry? Well, the loss is borne by the provider. Yeah, so essentially the financial loss is borne by the provider. The financial loss is borne by the provider. However, there is a loss for the person who is working as well. Because now he's made all this effort, right? He's made all this effort. And then they're not getting anything in return. So, they've worked hard. Say, for example, they started a restaurant. They worked hard, whatever. So even though they didn't spend with their money, but they spent with their effort and time, right? And so all of these days they did that, and yet they didn't, get anything in return. So they went into a loss. So, I mean, they share a loss, but not, so here what is meant is the financial loss. So the financial loss is borne by the provider of the capital, right? Make sense so far? Okay. All right, so here we have ended the categorization from the perspective of what? Goals and objectives. From the perspective of goals and objectives. Now, the next categorization that we're going to start is very, very important. Now, this was also important. I'm not saying it's not important, but inshallah we'll visit these ahead anyways. All right? The next categorization is very, very important because there are fundamental principles in aqd, fundamental principles in transactions. All right? So I want everyone, inshallah, to pay as much attention as possible. I know that you're paying attention so far. I'm not saying that.
Just a quick question. I will rest my question if it's going to come in
Yep.
future. What is if the partners, they are putting money and some are putting more and some are putting more effort? Which category would come, mudarba or?
So whenever one is putting, whenever there is effort and, so both are sharing effort and wealth. Are you saying that?
But one is sharing more money, less effort, and other one is putting more effort and less money.
Yeah. So it's the shirkatul a'mal. Right. So shirkatul a'mal. So they stipulate who's going to do what work. So they both put in money, but they also stipulate who's going to do what work. So for example, two tradies get together to form a contracting business as an example. One is a plumber, one is a tiler. So both do work. So obviously plumbing might be slightly less work, tiling might be more work, and sometimes tiling might be more work and plumbing might be less work. Right? So the work will obviously vary, and perhaps their capital that they've put in as well, that might vary as well. So that falls under shirkatul a'mal. All right? Okay, next one. So categories of aqd from the perspective of juristic outcomes. From the perspective of juristic outcomes. So what does it mean by juristic outcomes? Juristic outcomes meaning fiqhi outcomes. Fiqhi outcomes. All right? So who can tell me what is an example of a fiqhi outcome? An example. Just so that I... Haram. Haram is an outcome. Haram, halal, correct, incorrect, valid, invalid, right? So these are fiqhi outcomes. Make sense so far? All right. So the first thing that we'll be looking at, inshallah, so section 1, so there are 2 sections to this part, inshallah. Again, both very important and both very, very fundamental. So the definition of sahih and batil, the definition of sound and invalid or void transactions. A sound transaction. So we're going to first look at what the Hanafi scholars say. So here there is going to be a bit of difference of opinion. So in a lot of these there's going to be 3 main views, inshallah. All right? So there's 2 or 3 things that we're going to discuss, and in each of them there's going to be 2 or 3 main views. And try to remember them for future, inshallah. So we'll be coming back to it. We'll be referencing these, inshallah, again in the future, quite a lot. All right, so inshallah we have to keep these in mind. All right, so let's look at what the Hanafi scholars say. A sound transaction is, in Arabic, ما كان مشروعا بأصله ووصفه. That which is lawful in its foundations and in its attribute as well. In its foundation and in its attribute as well. When we talk about foundation, we mean things like pillars. Right? We mean things like pillars. So for example, in transactions as well, there are things which are known as the arkan of aqd. The arkan or the pillars of transaction, without which a transaction is not complete. The same way that we have arkan in marriage, for example. In marriage. So in marriage, without certain things being part of the nikah process, that nikah will be invalid. that nikah will be invalid. Can someone give me two simple examples which you already know that are arkan or pillars of a nikah transaction?
One is
Ijab and qabul, simple.
mahar,
Mahar is a requirement, but it's not a rukn that it should be given at the time. It's not a rukn. It's not considered as a rukn. There's a technical difference, but anyway, we'll discuss that later, inshallah. However, ijab and the qabul is a rukn of marriage, and it is also a rukn of this, by the way. It's also a rukn of transactions. It's also a rukn of aqd, the Islamic aqd. All right? So, when we say that, that which is lawful in its foundation meaning things like the arkan, the pillars of the aqd, the pillars of the transaction. And attributes, it means things which are non-arkan, which are other aspects of that transaction. So, for example, riba, right? Riba is an attribute of transaction rather than a transaction itself, rather than the foundation of the transaction itself. I'll explain to you how. Say, for example, you borrow me money, all right, and I have to pay you back that money. So this is a transaction, right? It's a transaction, or loan transaction. Yep. So this loan transaction is halal or not? Halal, right? As long as, of course, there's consent from you, consent from me, and the amount is known from both sides. So obviously it is a halal transaction, right? So the transaction in and of itself is halal. However, riba is something extra that is added on top of it. So it's not part of the main transaction itself. So riba is not a transaction on its own. It's an attribute of transaction. So the actual transaction is what? Is the loan. The actual transaction is the loan. So loan is halal in Islam. Loan is halal. However, that extra aspect or attribute that is added on top, which is the riba part, that is the haram part. So, as we've understood, riba is actually an attribute of a aqd, an attribute of the transaction rather than the foundation of the transaction. So the foundation is things like, ijab and the qabul, the offer and the acceptance, right? So when the Hanafi scholars say that that which is lawful in its foundation and in its attributes, this is what it means. So there's a difference between the foundation and the attributes. Does that make sense? Yep. So I've given the, some of the references as well, inshallah. And later on, when you get the notes, you will have the references in there as well, inshallah. So, other schools of thought. All right, so continuing further, inshallah. So according to the other major schools of thought, and here we're referring to the Hanbali, the Shafi'i, and the Maliki school of thought. So a few definitions are given, inshallah, so we'll just quickly go through those definitions. So the first one is that transaction whose pillars and conditions are complete. Whose pillars and conditions are complete. So in Arabic, هو ما استكمل أركانه وشرائطه. هو ما استكمل أركانه وشرائطه. Another one that is given, and this is in Al-Fatawa Al-Kubra, that is that ما ترتب عليه أثره وحصل به مقصوده. The one which has an effect or consequence from an Islamic perspective, and its objective is achieved. So objective is obviously the things that we've done in the previous categorization, right? The objective is transfer of ownership, etc., etc. So that is achieved, as well as there is a consequence or an outcome from an Islamic perspective. What does it mean by an outcome? Tell you what this means. This means that, say, a small little kid comes, all right, small kid, maybe 2 years old, right? He gives you some money, all right, and he says, I want to buy your computer, all right? So however he speaks, like say a 2-year-old could speak, all right, very smart 2-year-old, gives you some money, and he says that I want your laptop, I want your computer, all right, and you give it to him, right? So this has happened, right? But is there an outcome for it? Is there an outcome to this transaction or this interaction, if you want to call it that? Is there an outcome for it from an Islamic perspective? No, there is no outcome for it. Why? Because obviously some of the conditions of the bay', the conditions or the pillars of that transactions are not met. And that is that a person has to reach the stage of understanding for them to be able to carry out actions on their wealth. All right? Otherwise, it is not acceptable. Otherwise, it is not acceptable. So obviously, this does not have an outcome. So therefore, it is not considered a sahih or a sound transaction. All right? Does that make sense? The last one, again, it's very similar. مَا تَرَتَّبَ أَثَرُهُ عَلَيْهِ. The one which has an effect or a consequence. The one which has an effect or a consequence. So meaning, like, for example, ownership is achieved, then it is considered as a sound transaction. But if ownership is not achieved due to, some things not being fulfilled or some conditions not being fulfilled, obviously then the objective is not achieved, and therefore, it won't be considered as a sound transaction according to these definitions. So this is what the other schools of thought say. Now obviously, the opposite of a sound transaction is an unsound transaction. So unsound transaction, generally it is referred to as a batil transaction, or transaction which is غير صحيح. But the more correct term for it is a batil transaction. Now even amongst those transactions which are unsound, there are some categories which we'll be looking at, inshallah. I don't think we'll get to that. I think we'll leave that for next week, inshallah. And that is the difference between fasid and batil. Now this is a very, very fundamental difference of opinion amongst the scholars. If you understand this fundamental difference, a lot of the future masail will be made easy for you to understand, because they follow on from this principle. They follow on from this difference of opinion. All right, the difference between fasid and batil. Just to put it in brief, some scholars say that fasid and batil is exactly the same thing. Some scholars say that no, there is a difference between fasid and batil. And because there is a difference between fasid and batil, the outcomes and the consequences of that will also be different. All right, and for this reason, there are different rulings given by the different scholars depending on those situations. All right, so this next part is going to be very, very important. I think we'll leave that for next week, because I want to discuss it in a bit more detail with a few examples, inshallah. All right, so I think we will stop here. I'll just see what's next. All right, so I'll just put that up there very quickly. It's the same thing as what I just mentioned. An unsound transaction is a transaction which has a deficiency in one of its pillars, conditions, or attributes. Which has a deficiency in one of its pillars, conditions, or attributes. Make sense? Inshallah. All right, I think we'll stop here. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.